Hello, good morning, Engineer Mozar. How are you today? I hope you are doing good. So this will be the first video discussion that I'm going to make about your subject, the community engagement, solidarity, and citizenship. So I want you to watch this very carefully and listen to what I am saying. Please do not skip anything so you won't miss the lessons, and then you will fully understand what it is all about. Okay? If ever you are wondering why I'm speaking in English, yes, because this subject uses medium of instruction in English, but then I can, whatever it is, I can still use my second language, Filipino, or the first language, the mother tongue. Okay? So just don't mind the medium of communication that I'm using. Okay? So let's start. Community engagement, solidarity, and citizenship. Its concepts and perspective of community, the importance of understanding community dynamics, and community action. Kung maaalala ninyo nung nakaraan, sinabi ko na paano natin gagawin o paano ninyo gagawin itong pakikipag-ugnayan sa komunidad, na narito tayo sa sitwasyong pinagbabawalan tayong magtipon-tipon o makipag-ugnayan o makipaghawakan. Paano natin gagawin itong engagement na sinasabi at pagkakaroon ng pagkakaisa at pagiging makatao? So dito natin tatalakay. So just please watch and learn. Now, before that, you need to know the content standard of your subject. The learner demonstrate an understanding of the integration of social science perspective and community action initiatives. Next is the performance standard. The learner shall be able to synthesize the integrative experiences of implementing community actions, that is action, initiative applying social sciences, ideas, and methods. So yun na nga ang sinasabi ko, paano natin magagamit. Applying kasi, di ba? Applying social sciences and ideas and methods. Paano mo magagamit itong pinag-aralan nyo dati mo? Meron lamang tayong dalawang competencies sa lesson na ito. The first one is explain the importance of studying community dynamics and community action in relation to applied social sciences and the learner's future career options. Okay, so pag-uusapan din natin dito yung pagpili ninyo ng career o ng karera sa buhay. Kung ikaw ba talaga ay magiging academically inclined people or person, o kaya naman magiging business entrepreneur ka lang. Magiging business entrepreneur ka, not lang. No? And then the second one is develop and affirm sense of shared identity and willingness to contribute to the attainment of the common good. Ayan. Develop and affirm sense of shared identity and willingness to contribute to the attainment of the common good. What is this shared identity and willingness? Yung pagkabukal sa loob na ibahagi kung anong meron ka o anong kakayahan mo. Okay? So that would be the learning competencies that you are going to target. Okay? Next. So let's start. Let's go for the discussion. Okay. The first thing you need to know is that I want you to understand these terms. What are these terms? Ano ba itong mga termino na ito, sir? Bakit kailangan natin o kailangan ninyong malaman ito bago tayo tumungo o sumisid sa talagang paksa mo? Kailangan iyan. Number one is concept. What is concept? Sa Filipino, konsepto. Perspective, or sa Filipino, ito'y perspektibo or perspektiba, pananaw. And one is dynamic and actions. Ano ba itong apat na ito? Anong kinalaman na ito? Anong kinalaman ng mga salitang ito para mas maunawaan natin o mas maunawaan ninyo ang nilalaman ng asignaturang ito sa particular na bahagi ay ang lesson. Okay. The first one is the concept. What is concept? Ano ba itong konseptong ito? Okay. Alamin natin sa mga mula sa dictionary. Ang sabi, it is an abstract idea, a general notion, an idea or statement about all of the members or group or all the instance of a situation. Okay. Pag sinabi nating abstract idea, ibig sabihin hindi siya nahahawakan mo. Ibig sabihin nasa isip lamang siya. Bago pa natin ito mahahawakan ay kailangan ano yung gagawin? We need to put an action on this. For example, this is my idea. I need to na ganito ang mangyari sa bahay ko. Kailangan may dalawang two-story, kailangan may ganito, may ganyan. So yun na yung abstract idea mo. Hindi mo pa mahahawakan dahil nasa isipan mo pa siya. Ngayon, ang gagawin mo ay lalagyan natin ng work o ng action para mahawakan natin yung ideyang iyon. At hindi na siya magiging abstract. Ngayon, magiging konkreto na siya. Konkretong idea na. Okay? A general notion, katulad ng paggagawa ng mga birthday parties. The first thing, if ever you are going to hire someone to design or to have a decoration in your birthday party, the designer would ask from you what will be your concept. Okay? So that would be the idea that will be roaming around the party. The concept, yung konsepto. An idea or a statement about all of the members or a group or all one instant of a situation. Instances of situation. Sinsya na hindi ko makita. Ayan, kita ko na. Another term is, what is that? The perspective. Okay. Yung pananaw nimo. Ano ba itong perspective na ito? Okay, tingnan natin. It is a noun which means a way of looking at or thinking about something. Okay? Ano ba ang tingin mo sa kanya? Charit. Okay. It is your pananaw. It is your perspective of something, of a word, for example, love. Marami tayong maibibigay na pagpapakahulugan sa salitang love. Iba't iba tayo ng pananaw tungkol doon or sa kaugnay dyan. That is your perspective. All that can be seen from a certain point. Halimbawa, sa isang square, kapag tiningnan mo lang siya sa harap, ang makikita mo lang yung apat na kanto mo, tama? Yan, apat na kanto. Halimbawa, yan. Pag tiningnan mo ito sa harap, halimbawa ito yung square. Okay. It is the square. Halimbawa ito yung square. Titingnan mo siya sa harap, may makikita ka lang na apat na kanto. Okay? Pero kapag tiningnan mo siya sa may gilid, makikita mo yung kabilang side. So may ibang kanto na naman. Okay? Apat na kanto. Yun yung tinatawag nating 2D. Two-dimensional. At meron tayong tinatawag kapag tinignan mo naman sa loob o kaya gagawa ka ng reflection, may lalabas na naman na iilawan mo siya sa isang parte, okay? So may lalabas na anino. Ayun, may makikita ka na namang ibang side ng box, okay? So parang ganun. Perspective. Titingnan mo siya sa iba't ibang perspektiba. May iba, halimbawa, may nagkamali o mayroon siyang kasalanan. Yung iba, yung tinitingnan ay yung kasalanan niya lang. Yung iba naman ay yung dahilan kung bakit niya nagawa iyon. Yun yung perspective. Okay? And next one is dynamics. Ano ba itong dynamics? Have you ever heard a choir singing? Okay. Itong dynamics na ito ay ina-apply ng mga conductor sa kanilang pag-awit. Yung pagbabago-bago ng tono, yung biglang pagsigaw, biglang tahimik, biglang ganyan. Huwag na mag-sample. Okay. Mga ganon. Ito yung dynamics. Ito yung mga pagbabago nangyayari. It is marked by usually continuous and productive activity or change. Okay. Marked by usually continuous and productive activity or change. Constantly changing. Ito yung dynamics. Ngayon. So, please do not disregard these terms and please try to connect it with the subject or with the topic that we are discussing today, mo? Para kaagad ninyong maikonekta sa community engagement, solidarity, and citizenship. That is dynamics. Last one is the action. What is the action? Yung kilos na ginagawa. The accomplishment of a thing over a period of time, in stages or with a period of repetition, a thing done. The accomplishment of a thing over a period of time. Ang katapusan ng pinagugulan. The outcome. Okay? This will be the outcome of ng pinagugugulan mo sa mahabang panahon. Yan. So, anong kinalaman ng mga salitang ito? The concept, perspective, the dynamics, and the action sa ating pinag-uusapan. Yan ang aalamin natin para mas maging makabuluhan at mas madali ninyong maunawaan ang inyong asignaturang Community Engagement, Solidarity, and Citizenship. Okay? So, what is community, by the way? So, let me have a few minutes or seconds for you to understand, for you to answer, even though I cannot hear it. Just please answer, what is community? Okay. So whatever you have said, what is community is, that would be correct, mo? Because when we define community, it is a very broad word. It just hindi lamang siya nakakubli sa iisang kahulugan na masasabi mong mali yung sinabi niya, mali yung sinabi nito, na dapat ito yung tama. What is community? Literally, it is defined by two characteristics. Number one is location, which means a group of individuals bound within a specific geographic location. And then number two is social identification. That is an example of a collective that identifies common traits, goals, or customs. Okay. Halimbawa, dito tayo sa location or of a group of individuals bound with a specific geographic location. Okay. Dito sa Tandag, ang syudad ng Tandag, yung mga taong nandito ay isang komunidad. Ngayon, ang Tandag ay nahati sa 21 barangay. So, bawat barangay ay isang komunidad. Okay? Yun yung sinasabing geographic location. Tapos, bawat syudad, bawat munisipyo, ayan. Bawat bayan, bawat country, bawat kontinente, isang komunidad. Ngayon, sa pangalawang pagpapakahulugan, ito ay social identification. Okay. Ibig sabihin, kapag sinabi nating social identification, ay may pagkakakilanlan ayon sa lipunang kinabibilangan. Halimbawa, komunidad ng mga guro. Ayan. Social community ng mga guro. Tapos, ating halimbawa, yung tinatawag nating LGBTQ, isang komunidad din yon. Nabibilang sila socially sa LGBT. Mo? Tapos, halimbawa, mga engineer o mga tambay, isang komunidad ng tambay. Social community ng mga tambay. Ayan yon. social identification. Saan ka nabibilang? Diba? Sinasabi nga sa kasabihan, birds with the same feather flock together. Kung saan mo ramdam na ikaw ay kabilang, doon ka talaga pumupunta. Dahil iniiwasan nating ma-out of place. Tama? Okay. Yun yung sinasabi dito. Social identification. Kasunod. So, what is community? It is made up of people. Yan. Of course, it is made up of people. Can we consider animals as a community? Ding. Yes, we can also consider them as a community. Community of animal. Animals also have different communities. Community ng mga lion. Yan. Dito naman, tayo bilang tao. Okay? It's you and I, much like an organism. You may think of people as living cells that make up an organic being, so people within the community act in the same way and of same importance. Okay, so this is a community. But before that, for you to understand it fully, I want you to watch this video. Mo?
So, what is community? Take a minute and think about what community means to you. Defining community is not as straightforward as one might think. Community has been defined in many ways, and there's no single or correct definition. Community means different things to different people. Perhaps you thought of community as your geographic region, for example, your neighborhood or your town or city. Maybe you thought about your community as peers of the same age or ethnicity or gender. You might have thought of community as individuals with a shared interest, like playing soccer or sewing. You might even thought of community as just the wider public in general. All of these things are correct. At its core, community is a sense of belonging. It's important to note that communities will often come together to address a particular issue. For example, trying to prevent a school from closing. Similarly, communities will disband once that issue is addressed. For example, if they were able to prevent that school from closing. When communities come together to address an issue, this is what we call community engagement. Like community, there are many definitions of community engagement. For the purposes of this module, we will define community engagement according to the Tamarack Institute as the process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people affiliated by geographic proximity, special interest, or similar situations to address issues affecting the well-being of those involved. As I'm sure you can imagine, there are many benefits to participating in community engagement efforts. Community engagement empowers citizens to take responsibility for the things that are happening in their own community. It also encourages community members to address the needs that are directly relevant to their neighborhood or their community. When people participate in community engagement efforts, they're able to contribute to and enact change in their community rather than passively accepting the circumstances under which they live. Community engagement, not surprisingly, strengthens community spirit and levels of social inclusion and belonging of its members. When more voices are heard, higher quality solutions to community issues are created, and there's a more efficient use of the resources. Lastly, community engagement efforts can inform both policy making at various levels of government and service planning.
So that is community, and dyan nga sa video ay mas binigyan pa ng kahulugan kung ano yung community engagement mo. Naway yung pinanood ng mabuti. So community is just a social entity and goes beyond all categorization of space as its primary definition. More than a space, a community is made up of people, you and I. Okay, so ito yung sinabi ko kanina. So So sa community, nagtutulong-tulungan yung mga tao mo. Kapag, yun nga sinasabi, kapag kung ano yung boses ng madla, yun yung boses din ng Panginoon o ng Diyos. Yung may kaugnayan dyan. Kasi nagkakaisa eh. So let's go for the basic community and its concept. We have the first concept, self-help, community ownership, community participation, inclusion, access and equity. So what does it mean, self-help? From the word self-help, kusang tulong. Tinutulungan mo ng kusa ang iyong sarili. Ibig sabihin, in this concept, ikaw na nasa isang community, naghahanap ka ng tulong hindi mula sa iba, kundi mula sa iyo mismo. You develop yourself mo. The concept of self-help is about how individuals seek personal development without the help of others. However, self-help defines a community once each individual's wants and needs intersect. Okay, now, doon pumapasok ang community na iba. Community ay binubuo ng bawat individual. Ngayon, ang individual na ito'y tinutulungan ang kanyang sarili o nagsi-self-help siya. Ngayon, here comes another individual who is trying to develop himself or herself with something different needs, and when these two comes, and then itong pangangailangan ng isa o ni Juan ay may kaugnayan sa pangangailangan ni Tomas, doon pumapasok ang pagiging community. Kasi nga konsepto ng community. Paano magiging community sila kung ang bawat isa ay hindi nakikipag-ugnayan? Diyan po mapasok yung sinasabi nating kailangan mo ko, kailangan kita, so magtulungan tayo. Okay? Self-help defines a community once each individual wants and needs. Gusto at ang pangangailangan intersect. Ay, itong gusto ko pala ay maaari mong tulungan mo. Itong kailangan ko pala ay maaari mo kung matulungan dito. Nagkasugat sila. May kaugnayan ang bawat isa. May kaugnayan ang bawat pangangailangan at kagustuhan. Kaya sila nagkaroon ng community. Kaya nabuo ang community. Therefore, justifying a need to unify. Ayan. It is assumed that people are bound to seek self-help in their own lives and in their journey, find common avenues for cooperation and partnership among others, and therefore lay the foundation of capacity building. Ayan. Dahil nga ang kailangan ko ay nasa iyo, tapos ang kailangan niya ay nasa kanya, bakit hindi kayo magtulungan? Doon, mula sa pagiging self-help na gusto niyang ma-develop ang kanyang sarili, tapos itong isa naman ay gusto niyang ma-develop ang kanyang sarili at kayo nagkatagpo. Wow, love story. So nagtulungan at nabuo ang community na tinatawag. So yun ang konsepto ng self-help. Okay? Then another one is the ownership, community ownership. Okay. However, not everyone sees it as such due to verifying sense of community ownership. Okay. Ownership, pag-angkin. Okay. That is, members may possess. Sa loob ng community, may umaangkin pala, may nag-o-honor mo. Kaya sa isang kitang-kita naman 'yun, 'di ba? Minsan sa isang komunidad mayroong naghahari-harian na ako ini amo ini. Ako an manguna nan ini na komunidad. Ganon. However, not everyone sees it as such due to verifying sense of community ownership that its member may possess. Okay. So ownership in the sense is the level of commitment and accountability that an individual has for the community. Okay. Ownership in this sense is the level of commitment and accountability that an individual has for the community. In this community ownership, there is this cons and pros mo. There is this like bida and kontrabida. Some people, like for example, he is trying to run for a position, and then he wants to have a good progress in his or her area or place or kung saan siya napapabilang. Minsan naman may mga namumuno or nais magkaroon ng responsibilidad, subalit hindi naman ang kanyang layunin ay hindi para sa pangkalahatan kundi para lamang sa kanyang sariling kapakanan, no? Ownership in this sense is the level of commitment and accountability, ibig sabihin responsibility that an individual has for the community. Okay. Mapalad na lamang kung ang isang nagnanais na magkaroon ng ownership sa loob ng isang komunidad ang iniisip ay para sa kapakanan ng lahat, mapalad tayo. Subalit kung hindi, kawawa. Yun. This can be summed up by the level of involvement in the community and its member hold in the most basic operational structures of the commune. So that is where okay. I will not read anything any further because yun yung ibig sabihin ng community ownership. Sa loob ng isang komunidad, may nagnanais na maangkin yung komunidad na yun. Maaaring ang kanyang pag-angkin ay para sa kabutihan ng lahat o kaya naman para lamang sa kanyang pansariling kapakanan. No? Okay. Mula sa kanyang pagiging self-help, ngayon nagkaroon sila ng pag-ugnayan, ngayon pipili sila ng isang pangulo para sa kanilang komunidad. Yun. The next one is community participation. Ayan. Participation. Ibig sabihin, kapag sinabi nating participation, may ambag. Kumbaga kung sa isang project, ano yung ambag mo sa research? Ako sir ga-encode. Ako sir ako ang nakalap ng mga information sa survey. Sir ako ang ga-create ng idea. Sir ako ang leader. Sir ako ang pa-snack sa ila permi. Yaon. Ano yung ambag mo sa komunidad? Okay. Through community participation, individuals can provide their own contributions through acts of volunteerism in projects and other communal initiatives. More so, participation is not only focused on being part of an ongoing project, but an individual should be also an active member by taking part in the managerial and organizational development of the community, which includes the conceptualization, planning, operationalization, and review of initiatives. Okay. So dito sa community participation, yun nga, ano ang ambag mo sa komunidad mo? Nakikinig ka ba kapag may mga balita, may mga sinasabi ang mga tanod or mga PIOs ng inyong barangay? Halimbawa, sasabihin, okay, magkakaroon tayo ngayon ng general cleaning. Anong ginagawa mo? Naglilinis ka ba o sumusunod ka ba o hindi? Maliban dyan, maliban sa pag-participate sa kanilang ginagawang plano, ay mas may higit pa yung sinabi niya kanina, but an individual should be also an active member taking part in managerial and organizational development of the community. Ibig sabihin, hindi ka lamang nasa labas ng circle. Yung sinasabi kong circle ay halimbawa barangay captain, tapos yung kanyang mga opisyales, mga kagawad, and then itong mga tanod. Tapos itong mga membro, yung tinatawag natin mga naninirahan sa loob ng barangay lang muna tayo para mas madali yung saklaw. Sa loob ng barangay, halimbawa ikaw yung membro ng barangay na yon. Maliban doon sa pagtulong sa kanilang mga ginagawang plano, ay mas dapat yung bawat individual ay magnais o mag-desire na makilahok din sa loob ng inner circle sa mga nagplaplano mo. Kaya nga maraming tumatakbo ng kagawad maliban sa sahod na makukuha dahil yung una nilang balak is to help maging mas mo engage pa ngadto sa sud gayud na mahimunan ay uni ato himuon na plano about this, uni ato himuon about na solusyon sa ini na problema. Yun, ito yung sinasabi na but an individual should be also an active member by taking part in the managerial organizational development of the community, which includes conceptualization. Okay, halimbawa puno na yung candidacy para sa para sa posisyon. Maaari ka namang magbigay ng yung ideya para sa pagbuo ng kanilang plano kahit nasa labas ka lang ng inner circle mo. Kasi includes conceptualization, planning. Pwede mong maaari mong idaan ang iyong mga ideya sa kagawad. Kagawad, ano yung plano? Amuinin ako, suggestion, amuinin. Itong kagawad na ito ang magdadala sa kanilang pagpupulong na gagawin. Yun, yung sinasabi niya na individual should also be an active member by taking part in the managerial and organizational development of the community. Yun yung community participation. Ano yung ambag mo? Yun yung tanong. Okay, next one is inclusion. While participation is key, inclusion is one aspect of community that is integral. Means maselan, fragile, and binding and the collective into a whole. Collective into a whole. Ibig sabihin, pag collective, may iba't ibang uri yan. Kokolektahin into hanggang sa maging isa. Okay? As a form of social assembly, the personalities within a community are different and unique. Kaya siya nagiging integral o kaya siya nagiging fragile na bahagi dahil iba ang kanyang ugali, ang kanyang paniniwala, iba ang kanyang relihiyon, yan, sa paniniwala. In respect to culture, race, religion, and other identifiable social identities, one person is unique as to the other. Yun yung ibig sabihin ng inclusion. Kahit magkakaiba-iba kayo ng paniniwala, dahil sa loob ng isang barangay, may iba't ibang taong nakapaloob dyan. Hindi lang mang-iisa. May iba't ibang sekta, may iba't ibang relihiyon, may iba't ibang lahi mo. Kasi yung iba dumadayo tapos doon na naninirahan. Kaya itong bahaging ito is very critical, very integral, very fragile. So, kahit ganoon pa man ang bumubuo sa isang komunidad, mahalaga pa rin na sila'y kasali. Lahat kasali. Walang maiiwan. Moreover, inclusion equals the need for the community to be compromising and tolerant. Ibig sabihin ng compromising and tolerant, dahil nga magkakaiba-iba ng mga paniniwala, ng lahi, ng sekta, kapag gumagawa kayo ng plano, ay iniisip ninyo sila, kino-consider ninyo ang bawat isa. Community to be compromising and tolerant of these differences. Halimbawa, sa isang barangay, ang mga sekta ay Iglesia ni Cristo, tapos Katoliko, tapos meron pa dito mga Pentecost, tapos meron ditong iba't iba, Muslims. Ngayon, itong Muslims ay ilang beses ba sila magdadasal sa isang araw, kaya Friday. Tapos ito naman Katoliko, umaga, hapon. So, kapag ang mangyayari kapag nagdadasal itong mga Muslims para magkaroon ng kapayapaan sa isang komunidad, so ang ginagawa ng ibang membro ng community ay tahimik lang sila sa panahon ng nagdadasal o kaya naman nire-respeto. Yun yung ibig sabihin ng compromising and tolerant. And then the last one is access and equity. Ibig sabihin ng access, maaari mo tong magamit na bagay mo, may access ka dyan. Tapos pantay-pantay ang lahat, hindi naglalamangan. Minsan sa loob ng komunidad, sa realidad, maiisip talaga natin na may mga lamangang nangyayari, no? Lalo-lalo sa paghahanap ng trabaho, yung iba naghahanap ng kanilang backer para mas madaling makapasok. Yung iba naman nagsisikap na makuha ang ganitong mga degree para kahit kung walang backer ay makakapasok pa rin. Pero ang ninanais talaga natin ay magkaroon ng pantay-pantay na paggamit sa mga pangangailangan, o kaya naman pantay-pantay na trabaho mo. Access and equity, these two are the goals that a commune must strive for to create a better society. Yan. Para magkaroon tayo ng mas magandang komunidad, ito yung ating dapat na makamit, o ito yung sistema na dapat nating ipatupad. The access and equity, ang karapatang makagamit at ang pantay-pantay na karapatan mo. Mahirap man itong gawin, pero kung ang bawat isa ay nagnanais ng ganito at ang bawat isa ay hindi lamang nagnanais kundi binibigyan ng kilos, who knows, isang araw yun na pala ang ginagawa nating lahat. So that is the basics of community, its concept. Self-help mula sa pagnanais na ma-develop ang kanyang sarili, ay nakipag-ugnayan sa iba. Tapos nang nagkaroon na ng community, ang kanyang pagnanais na ma-develop ay mas hinigitan niya pa at magkaroon at maangkin itong komunidad at magnais ng kagandahan para sa komunidad, hindi lamang para sa kanyang sarili. And then community participation, ikaw na isang member ng komunidad ay nagnais kang makilahok sa lahat ng activity at kabutihang maidudulot para sa komunidad. Ang inclusion, kahit iba't iba ng lahi, paniniwala, ay kasali, walang maiiwan, walang discrimination na nagaganap. Access and community mo, makakagamit ka at pantay-pantay na pagtrato sa bawat isa. Yun yung basics of community. It's ang mga konsepto na nakapaloob. Ngayon, alam mo na itong mga bagay na ito. Ano na ang mangyayari? Okay, tingnan natin ang isa pang pagtatalakay. Community as a movement. Okay. Ngayon, alam mo na ang pangangailangan mo na naibibigay na ng kapwa mo. At ikaw naman ay naibibigay ang kanyang pangangailangan. Ngayon, hindi maiiwasan talaga sa isang komunidad ang magkaroon ng suliranin. So ngayon, gagawa kayo ng pagkilos. Yan. Tulad nga ng sinasabi kanina. Okay, bago ko makaligtaan yung sinasabi ko kanina na may kaugnayan sa konsepto ng community, sa basics of community. Tingnan natin itong video na ito.
In this picture, there are many different species interacting in different ways. For example, this caterpillar is eating the leaf, and these larvae are feeding off of the caterpillar. These are the type of interactions we're going to explore in our video on communities today. And let's start with an overview by defining community. This picture shows a community that we would find in an aquatic ecosystem. A community is simply all of the species living in a particular area. You could also think of it as all the biotic components of an ecosystem. And these species are going to interact, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, and sometimes in neutral ways. Now we can analyze the structure of a community in two ways. Here are two different communities. Now, one way we can look at these communities is in terms of species richness. This is simply the number of different species. And if we compare our two communities, they have the same species richness. This community has 4 different plant species, and this community has 4 different plant species. However, we can look at species abundance as well, and this is the percentage of each species. And here the communities differ, because in community 1, there is 25% of each plant species, but in community 2, plant A dominates at 80%, and the other 3 species are in a much lower proportion. Now let's take a look at types of interactions known as symbiotic interactions. Symbiosis is something you've seen before if you've ever watched Finding Nemo. Symbiosis is a type of interaction in which 2 different species are closely associated with each other for a long period of time. And there are 3 main types of symbiosis: mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. Let's start with mutualism. This is the relationship between a clownfish and a sea anemone. In this relationship, both species benefit. The clownfish gets to seek shelter in the stinging rays of the sea anemone. Meanwhile, the sea anemone's feces serve as food for the clownfish. The clownfish will also fight off smaller animals that might be a threat to the sea anemone, and they also provide important nutrients to the sea anemone. Parasitism is quite different. In this case, the parasite benefits, but the host is harmed. So we can characterize that as a positive and negative relationship. The host is the organism that the parasite is feeding off of. And there are a couple of different parasites. An ectoparasite is a parasite that feeds off of the outside of the host, whereas an endoparasite gets inside the host and feeds from the inside. Our third type of symbiosis is commensalism. In this relationship, one organism benefits and the other is unaffected. For example, these egrets, that's a type of bird, like to hang around the cattle and pick insects and other types of food out of their fur. Clearly, this will benefit the egret, but as far as scientists know, it doesn't really appear to benefit the cattle, but it doesn't harm the cattle either. Another example of commensalism is the barnacle and the whale. Barnacles are these creatures, shell-like creatures, that like to attach themselves to whales and basically catch a ride and get some nutrients in the process. The whale, however, will have no idea that they're even there. So one is benefiting, one is unaffected. Now let's take a look at some other interactions. One that we've already studied a lot is predation. Clearly in this interaction, the predator benefits and the prey does not. This is not symbiosis because they don't live together very long. If the predator catches the prey, that's it for the prey. Now, prey have certain defense mechanisms. Aside from perhaps being able to run quickly, some of them have cryptic coloration, camouflage, to help them hide. Others have the opposite, aposematic coloration. These are really bright colors that will warn predators that they are toxic or taste unpleasant. And then finally, this is particularly cool, mimicry. This is where a harmless species, like this caterpillar, has evolved to resemble a very dangerous species, and thereby a predator will avoid the harmless species because it mistakes it for the dangerous species. Herbivory is similar, only this time it's the herbivore preying on a plant. And in this case, of course, the herbivore benefits, but the plant does not. And plants can't run away, but they do have defense mechanisms. For example, thorns or spines, or they may even produce chemicals that are toxic or taste bad. Peppermint, nicotine, and strychnine all come from plants as chemical defenses. Let's finish by exploring competition. This interaction involves a term known as a niche. A niche is simply an organism's job in its ecosystem. It's all of the resources, like food or water, that the species uses to survive. And if you have 2 different species that share the same niche, they're going to be competing for those resources. And this harms both species because they're going to lose out on resources. Now,
In this situation, one of two things can happen. One can outcompete the other, one will survive, one will lose, or they may adjust their niche so that they both can survive. And here's an example of that. A fundamental niche is shown here. Here we've got a barnacle, and there is no competition. So it can live both above the ocean and below the ocean. So this is its potential niche without competition. But in reality, this barnacle is going to have a realized niche, because in reality, there's going to be other species, such as barnacle B, competing with it. And in this situation, barnacle A reduces the size of its niche. It decides to specialize and live up here, while barnacle B reduces its niche and lives down here. This way, they both can have enough resources to survive, though perhaps not at the same carrying capacity, by resource partitioning. So a species' actual niche is its realized niche, and this happens as a result of competition. And that concludes our exploration of interactions within communities.
Okay, that is what it means in the concept. Ikaw may kailangan sa kanya, siya naman may kailangan sa iyo, at minsan pa kinagamit mo lang ang isang tao para sa kapakanan mo, at siya naman kahit ganoon man ang nangyayari, may mga pakinabang pa rin ang isa't isa. So let's move on sa community as a movement. Yan. So what does it mean? A community is more than just a collective. It is more than just a collective. It acts much like a living entity that takes on life. Living within the imagination of its member, a community also embodies a perspective, identity, and stand much like a social movement. To put simply, a social movement is more issue-specific and may exist primarily for its own purpose, while a community may embody several social movements within its own ecosystem. To look deeper into its dynamics, let's focus on the okay. So what does it mean? Community as a movement, may isyong nangyari. Ikaw ngayon, ano yung movement na gagawin ninyo as a community? Amo? To put it simply, a social movement is more issue-specific. Ano yung isyong nangyayari sa loob ng komunidad? Paano natin lulutasin? Ano yung mga hakbang na ating gagawin para malutas ito? At ano yung mga solusyon na ating iisipin para mas mabisa ang pagkalutas ng suliraning iyon? Community as a movement. Pero may mga binanggit dito. Okay, katulad ng advocacies. For issues and concerns that shared among its members, advocacy. Ito yung ano yung ibig sabihin ng advocacy? Ang iyong mga nilalayon sa buhay. Halimbawa, nararamdaman mo sa loob ng iyong community ay ang mga kababaihan ay tinatapak-tapakan, parang binabaliwala. Ngayon, ano yung advocacy mo? Dahil ito yung nakikita mong suliranin, ngayon nakaisip ka ng isang solusyon. At ito yung advocacy na gagawin mo para mailigtas ang mga kababaihan sa loob ng iyong barangay o ng iyong komunidad. Advocacies formed the community and its leaders. To improve and garner support, communities try to garner support from other individuals or groups which are aligned with their worldview. Okay, balikan natin yung halimbawa. Ang kababaihan ay minamaltrato o hindi tinatrato ng tama. Ikaw ay ngayon ay nag-iisa ka lang na nakakita ng ganoon. O ikaw lang yung taong may lakas ng loob upang labanan ang maling gawang iyon. So dahil nag-iisa ka lang laban sa maraming gumagawa ng ganoon, hindi mo sila kaya. Ngayon ang gagawin mo ay maghahanap ka ng iyong kasama na may parehong pananaw kaugnay sa suliraning iyong nakikita. Doon dadami kayo at lalabanan nyo na ay ang suliraning iyon, dahil hanggang magkaroon ka na ng sapat na pangkat, sapat na lakas, ay maaari mo na silang labanan mo. Yun yung advocacy. At dito papasok yung tinatawag nating networking. Ayan. Hindi dahil networking na sinasabi na open-minded ka ba, Gusto mo bang pumasok sa networking? Hindi yung ganon. Mo? Pero may slight na may kaugnayan doon, pero kaiba. Dahil nga, yung sinasabi ko na, ikaw lang yung nag-iisang nagkalakas ng loob, ngayon maghahanap ka ng iyong kakampi. Doon papasok yung networking mo. Makikipag-usap ka sa kanya, kukumbinsihin mo siya na sumali sa'yo hanggang sa dumami kayo. Ikaw nakakumbinsi ka ikaw nakakumbinsi ng isa, ilalagay mo sa iyong kanan. Tapos naghanap ka na naman ng isa, inilagay mo sa kaliwa. Tapos itong nasa kanan at kaliwa mo, naghanap ng iba pang kasapi ng pangkat. Yung kanan inilagay niya sa kanyang kanan. Tapos nakahanap siya ulit ng isa, inilagay niya sa kaliwa. Tapos yung kaliwa mo naman, naghanap siya, inilagay niya sa magkabilang side ng kanyang network. Hanggang sa mas lumaki kayo, papasok na doon ang networking. Yun na yung networking na sinasabi. Formations are created with the organic networking of actors that later on find commonalities and avenues for cooperation and partnership. Ngayon, nakahanap ka na ng maraming tao na matutulungan mo. Ikaw yung leader. Ito, inilagay mo siya dito sa bahaging ito. Itong tao na ito, ginawa mong ganyan. Ito ang posisyon na ibinigay mo sa kanya. At ang bawat isa ay may kanya-kanyang position o role, na kanilang gagampanan para mabuo, para maisakatuparan ang advocacy ang iniisip mo. Sa ating halimbawa, ang paglaban sa maling trato laban sa mga kababaihan. Yun yung networking na sinasabi. So partnerships can take form between individuals or groups of various background that share a common identification. Common, kahit isa lang na common. But at the same time, contribute on different levels to solve problems and overcome obstacle. That is, nagkakaroon na ng movement. Kasi kumikilos na kayo laban doon sa suliranin na iyon. And then, embracing this king of adversity is critical in building networks that last and work under various consequences and challenges. Kahit na mahirap, lalabanan ninyo dahil nagkakaisa naman kayo doon. Pagkatapos doon, nakabuo ka na mayroon ka ng advocacy o lang layunin, nagkaroon ka na ng mga tao, ngayon, ano na ang gagawin? Ang kumilos laban doon. Ito yung tinatawag nating social action na. So, standing on the foundation of advocacies and networking is the hope for social action. Social action, ibig sabihin, social tao, lipunan. O dahil marami kayo, pagkilos ng isang lipunan. At the end of the day, the community hopes to address the issues of the status quo through the combined efforts of actors yung kumikilos actors. The planning, conceptualization, operationalization, and implementation of action will be possible without the political will of actors toward meeting general compromise to effect social change. Okay. So yun, kumikilos na kayo dahil nakagawa na kayo ng layunin, nakabuo na kayo ng network. Ano ang gagawin ninyo? Kikilos na kayo. Lalaban na kayo doon. So that is the community as a movement. Okay, so any question? Did you understand now the concepts and perspective of community, the importance of understanding community dynamics and its action? So I hope if you don't have any question, then let's proceed to the activities.